My son handed me a glass of wine with a smile. But hours earlier, I'd seen texts about a staged cottage fire and a forged art sale worth $2.5 million in my name. I stayed calm, swapped our glasses, and waited. What happened next? Let's just say, karma doesn't miss. I used to believe that love could fix anything. Maybe that sounds naive coming from a 56-year-old woman, but when you've raised someone from the time they were a helpless baby to a grown man, it's hard not to hold on to that belief. My name is Martha Ellis. I was a high school literature teacher for over 30 years here in Savannah, Georgia. Quiet, old streets, riverside air, it was a good place to build a life. And for the longest time, I thought I had one worth holding on to. I never married after my first heartbreak. Damon came into my life through adoption when I was in my 20s, fresh out of my teaching program, filled with hope and the urge to give someone the kind of love I never got myself. He was only a few months old, abandoned by a girl who wanted nothing to do with motherhood. I remember holding him for the first time. He had a full head of dark hair and the most curious eyes. I promised myself I'd never let him feel unwanted again. Raising him wasn't always easy. He was difficult, stubborn, short-tempered, even manipulative at times, but I thought it was just a phase. Boys will be boys, I told myself. I poured everything into him. My time, my energy, my savings. Every birthday, every scraped knee, every heartbreak, I was there. And when he got older and started asking for money, I gave it. He always had reasons: school fees, startup ideas, emergencies. I'd say no sometimes, but not often. Deep down, I just wanted to be needed. Maybe that was my mistake. A few years ago, he married Ruby. Pretty girl. Too pretty for someone like Damon, if I'm being honest. I knew from the start she had a certain sharpness to her. Not the kind you respect, but the kind you don't turn your back on. She worked in fashion retail at the time, managing a boutique downtown, and her tastes were as expensive as her perfume. Still, I wanted to be fair. I told myself not to judge. I welcomed her into the family with open arms, hoping that maybe a stable home would soften them both. But things started changing quickly after the wedding. They came around less. Calls got fewer. Then one day, out of the blue, Damon called and told me Ruby had come across an opportunity. A once-in-a-lifetime deal, he said. An original antique painting from a European collector, supposedly worth a small fortune. They needed help fast. They were short on cash and couldn't get approved for a loan. Damon begged. Said they'd pay me back in no time. Ruby was pregnant, he added. That word hit me hard. I pictured tiny hands, first birthdays, second chances. So I wired them the money, $240,000, without asking too many questions. I don't know what I expected. Maybe a visit. Maybe gratitude. Maybe just a thank you, Mom. What I got instead was something I wasn't supposed to hear. They called me, or thought they ended the call. I was about to hang up when I heard Ruby's voice on the other end, laughing. Can you believe she actually sent the money? She said. No hesitation. We didn't even have to show her a picture. Damon's voice followed. She's still trying to buy love. Old habits die hard. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the phone, my heart sinking like a stone. The floor under me might as well have disappeared. But that wasn't the worst part. The next words out of their mouths would stay with me forever. We've got to speed things up, Damon said. The cottage's gas line is easy to rig. Just one bad night. We play our cards right, and the house is ours. Ruby laughed again. And that painting? We resell it next month. If it fetches what we think, we're set. The old lady won't even be around to miss it. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the phone in my hand, listening to them discuss my death like it was just another business deal. They wanted me to move into the guest cottage, a small, detached unit on the edge of the property. Damon had been pushing the idea for weeks, saying I'd have more privacy. I thought he was being thoughtful. I'd even started tidying it up, choosing curtains, picking out paint swatches. I didn't know it was supposed to be my coffin. What they didn't know, what no one ever cared to ask, was that I used to volunteer with the fire department. I took weekend classes on safety, fire response, and emergency preparedness after retiring. A hobby, really. I knew gas line structures better than they did. That night, I crept out and disconnected the lines myself. Every valve, every connection. I made it look untouched. Then I smiled. For the first time in years, I smiled. Because now I had something they didn't expect. A plan. When I told Damon and Ruby they could move in temporarily, they didn't even try to hide their excitement. Damon even brought me tea one afternoon. Ruby suddenly started calling me Mom, with that syrupy sweetness that always made my skin crawl. Over the next few weeks, they transformed into the perfect children. They made me breakfast. They offered to do the laundry. They brought me supplements, fruits, little gifts. All with the same intent. Butter me up. Get me to sign the house over. I played along, feigning confusion, saying I'd look into it, after the holidays. But every act of kindness from them now felt like poison, sweet on the surface, rotten underneath. Then, just as I thought I'd adjusted to the disgust quietly boiling inside me, they took Pepper. Pepper wasn't just a parrot. He was family. I raised that bird for 11 years, ever since a student gave him to me after I retired. Pepper knew my moods, repeated my favorite poems, sat beside me through lonely nights. He'd wake me up every morning with a cheerful "good day, darling." When I couldn't talk to anyone, I talked to him. One day, I came home from the store and his cage was gone. Empty. Clean. Vanished. Damon didn't even look up from the couch. When I asked where Pepper was, he shrugged and said, "Sold him. Got a few $100. He was noisy. Something inside me cracked that day, not with sound, not with rage. Just an eerie silence. That night, I found a small pill bottle in Ruby's purse, tucked behind her makeup. Sedatives. Strong ones. I stared at the label and smiled again. If they wanted to play games, they were about to learn I had a few moves of my own. After I found the sedatives in Ruby's purse, everything inside me shifted. I stopped feeling scared. The shaking in my hands stopped. The lump in my throat disappeared. What came instead was a stillness, cold, sharp, and focused. That night, while they were asleep, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and a cup of tea and started planning. I knew I couldn't confront them. They were too far gone, too greedy, too used to me bending over backwards. If I accused them, they'd lie, cry, twist the story until I started doubting myself. No, that wouldn't work. So I did what I'd always done. I kept quiet and watched. I played the part of the tired, sweet, aging mother, the one they thought was too slow to notice what was happening around her. Meanwhile, I began to take note of everything. Damon was careless with his phone. He left it lying around all the time. One afternoon, while he was out getting groceries, I picked it up and checked his recent browser history. There it was, search after search. How to safely manipulate a gas leak. Ways to cause carbon monoxide poisoning without detection. How to rig a cottage gas line. My chest tightened, but I didn't panic. I took photos of the search history with my own phone and placed his back exactly where it had been. Every time they asked about the house transfer, I smiled and nodded. Just waiting on the notary, I'd say. It's all in progress. They believed me. Ruby even offered to help pack up some of my things in the main house. So you can move into the cottage comfortably, she said sweetly. I stared at her and nodded. That's so thoughtful of you. Then I started adjusting their meals. They were used to me cooking. It had always been one of the few ways I expressed affection, through food. Damon especially loved my stews, my lasagna, my sweet potato casseroles. Ruby liked creamy soups and fluffy mashed potatoes. I leaned into that. I cooked every day, rich, indulgent meals. I added extra butter, extra salt, plenty of sugar. And then, little by little, I began lacing some dishes with tiny amounts of their own sedatives. Not enough to knock them out, no. Just enough to dull their minds, make them slower, heavier, more tired than usual. They started sleeping longer, forgetting conversations, growing irritable. You've been looking tired lately, I said once to Damon over breakfast. He yawned and rubbed his face. Just stress, I guess. Ruby's been on edge too. I sipped my tea and nodded. Maybe you both need a break. They never suspected a thing. Then, one evening, Damon came into my room with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We were thinking, he said. It might be nice to take you out on the river this weekend. Just us three. A little bonding on the water. I looked up from my knitting. On the boat? I asked. That sounds lovely. I agreed without hesitation, and I think that surprised him. He expected more questions, more caution. But I smiled warmly. We haven't done something like that in ages. For the next few days, I prepared quietly. I visited the local pharmacy and bought small boxes of chocolate truffles. Then, in my kitchen, I melted and remolded them, carefully inserting the same sedatives I'd found in Ruby's purse. Not too much, just enough to make sure they'd sleep through anything. Saturday arrived. The sun was high, and the river sparkled like glass. We boarded the private boat Damon had borrowed from a friend. Small, elegant, quiet. Ruby wore sunglasses and a wide smile. Damon carried a cooler full of drinks. To a fresh start, he said, handing me a glass of champagne. I took it, thanked him, then turned slightly to check my purse, and switched my glass with Ruby's. Then I offered them the truffles. I made these last night, I said. A little treat for the ride. They each took one, grinning. Didn't know you baked candy now, Mom, Damon said with his mouth full. Trying new things, I replied calmly. 15 minutes later, their heads began to nod. Ruby's hand slipped from her lap. Damon's words grew slurred. I need to sit down, he mumbled. I watched them both slouch into the cushions, their eyelids drooping. I didn't wait. I took the wheel, guided the boat gently toward a secluded dock I had arranged in advance, and called the private ambulance service I had spoken to earlier in the week. They arrived quickly, no questions asked. Damon and Ruby were lifted into stretchers, unconscious but stable. I didn't ride with them. I stood on the shore, watching the boat rock softly in the water, and breathed in the salt air like I was waking up from a long, long dream. I returned home that evening, took a long shower, and sat down with a cup of peppermint tea. For the first time in years, the house was silent and peaceful. The next day, I got a call from Harold Bennett. We'd met a few months earlier during a fire safety event I volunteered at. He ran a well-known estate and appraisal firm, and we'd exchanged numbers over a conversation about rare book collections. His voice was warm, concerned. You left in a hurry yesterday. Everything okay? I'm fine, I said. Just had to take care of a family emergency. Anything I can do? I paused. Then I smiled. Maybe. But I'll let you know. I didn't tell him about Damon yet. That part of the story would come later. For now, I had work to do. I began going through Damon and Ruby's things in the house. I hired a moving company, boxed everything up, clothes, gadgets, jewelry, and sent it all to a local donation center. I changed the locks. I rekeyed the gates. I deleted their fingerprints from the security system. Then I booked them a luxury vacation to Italy, a full package. Flights, hotels, spa treatments. Paid with Damon's own credit card, the same one he used to take Ruby shopping when they thought I wasn't watching. They left the hospital a few days later and flew out clueless. While they were gone, I transferred every cent they had drained from my account, all $240,000, onto a detailed invoice. Every item they charged on their trip was logged and listed, and it was all billed to Damon Ellis. When they returned, broke and furious, I was already waiting. The day Damon and Ruby returned from Italy, I was in the garden clipping basil. I had planted an herb bed just 2 weeks earlier, mint, lavender, rosemary, and of course basil. They thrived in the sun, unlike the bitterness that had lived inside my house for too long. I knew they'd be coming home that morning. I had prepared everything. They arrived with force, as expected. The taxi screeched to a stop, and they stormed up the driveway, dragging their designer luggage with them. I stayed outside, letting them ring the bell over and over again. The same bell that once welcomed them into a loving home now stood as a wall. When I finally opened the door, Damon barged in. His face was flushed red, more from anger than travel exhaustion. Ruby followed, clutching a folder I had mailed the day before. The invoice, itemized down to the last euro. Damon threw his arms in the air. Are you out of your mind? What the hell is this, Mom? He snapped. Ruby's voice was shrill behind him. You charged all that to Damon's name? You tricked us. That's theft. I calmly shut the door behind them and walked toward the living room. They followed, shouting. I didn't respond. Not yet. I sat down in my favorite chair and gestured to the couch. If you want to talk, I said softly, you can sit. But if you're just here to scream, you can see yourselves out. That quieted them for a moment. Ruby's lips tightened, but she sat. Damon paced instead. You've completely lost it. First the trip, now the locks, our stuff. Where's all our stuff? Gone, I replied. I donated it. You don't live here anymore. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then he exploded again. This is my house. You said you were signing it over. We moved in because you said. I held up a hand and reached into the drawer next to me. I pulled out a folder, the same one Ruby had assumed held the transfer papers weeks ago. I tossed it gently onto the coffee table. Damon opened it with shaky hands and flipped through the contents. His face drained of color as he read the last page. What is this? He whispered. This says you're still the legal owner. Ruby snatched it, eyes scanning the paper rapidly. You forged something. This can't be. No, I interrupted. It's exactly what you signed. You never read the fine print. That document was only a declaration of intent, non-binding. For display purposes. It has no legal weight. You were both too greedy to check. They stared at me like I had grown a second head. You tricked us, Ruby whispered. I leaned forward slightly. No. I protected myself. There's a difference. Damon sank onto the arm of the couch, stunned. For the first time, he looked like a man completely lost. His voice came out cracked. But I'm your son. I didn't blink. I didn't soften. No, I said. You're not. His eyes snapped to mine. What? I stood and went to the same drawer, pulling out a white envelope. I handed it to him. Go ahead. Open it. He hesitated, then tore it open. Inside was the paternity test. I watched his fingers tremble as he read. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, You're lying. No. Your biological mother was the woman who destroyed my marriage. Your father brought you home after she disappeared. I took you in. I raised you. I gave you a home, an education, a future. I loved you like you were my own. But I was never your mother in blood. Only in choice. And you threw that choice away. Ruby looked at Damon like she didn't know him anymore. His head hung low. His hands covered his face. I continued, my voice calm, controlled. You betrayed the only person who ever stood by you. You used me. Lied to me. Tried to kill me. Sold my parrot for pocket change and laughed about it. Damon tried to speak, but I held up a hand again. I'm done, Damon. I've given you everything. And now, I'm taking back my life. I walked to the door and opened it wide. Get out. Neither of them moved at first. Ruby stood up, muttering about lawsuits, threats, revenge. I didn't answer. I just stared at her, letting silence say what words couldn't. Damon stood last, moving like a man underwater. As he passed me, he looked into my eyes, desperate, broken. I never meant for it to go this far, he said. I nodded. That's the problem. You never meant anything. You just took. They stepped out onto the porch. Before I closed the door, I said one last thing. Oh, and about the truffles? I never ate the ones you made. But you both had plenty of mine. I only returned what was already yours. Then I shut the door. After I closed the door on Damon and Ruby, I stood in the hallway for a moment, letting the silence sink in. It wasn't the silence of fear or sadness. It was the silence of finally being free. No footsteps creeping behind me, no fake smiles, no forced laughter or calculated kindness. Just me standing in my own home, with no one left to perform for. But peace, as I learned, doesn't always arrive without one final storm. 2 days later, I was pruning the lavender in the backyard when I got a call from the hospital. Damon and Ruby had both collapsed just outside their rented motel room. Dehydration, elevated heart rate, exhaustion. Likely brought on by weeks of stress, malnutrition, and whatever their bodies had been collecting from my kind cooking. They were stable, the nurse said, but weak. They might not regain full strength for a while. When she asked if I was next of kin, I simply replied, No, not anymore. Still, I went to see them, one last time. Not out of guilt. I don't have any left for them. But maybe out of curiosity. Closure. I walked into Damon's hospital room first. He looked thin, pale, a shadow of the boy I once held. Tubes in his arms, dark circles under his eyes. He turned his head when he saw me and whispered, Mom. That word used to move something in me. Now, it felt like a label I had shed. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know who I was without you. I stood at the foot of his bed and looked at him for a long time. I thought of the nights I stayed up marking his school assignments. The way he used to sing in the car with me as a child. The thousands of dollars I'd given him. The trust. The second chances. You should be sorry, I finally said. But that's not enough anymore. I gave you my whole life. And you treated me like a stepping stone. Like a bank account. Like nothing. His voice broke. What do you want from me? Nothing, I replied. Not anymore. I walked out of his room without turning back. Ruby was in the next room. She was awake, staring blankly at the ceiling. Her makeup was gone, her hair unkempt. The polished woman who once barked orders at me from my own kitchen now looked like a faded photograph. She didn't speak when I entered. She didn't even look at me. I didn't say anything either. I just stood there, letting the silence do what words never could. Then I turned and walked out. That was my goodbye. In the weeks that followed, I started putting my life back together, slowly, gently, without rushing. The first thing I did was redecorate the house. I painted the walls in colors I liked. Got rid of the stiff furniture Ruby had insisted on buying. Donated every dish, towel, and curtain that reminded me of them. I even replaced the welcome mat. Then I called Harold. We'd stayed in touch, mostly through short messages and calls, but I hadn't seen him since before the boat incident. When I heard his voice again, calm and warm, I felt something loosen in my chest. Still owe you dinner, he said. You do, I replied. And I think I'm finally hungry enough to accept. We started seeing each other more after that. Nothing dramatic. Just simple things: coffee in the park, visits to the farmer's market, long walks through the historic squares. Harold never pushed. He didn't try to fix anything. He just listened. And after all the noise I'd lived through, that felt like more than enough. One afternoon, we were sitting on the back porch sipping tea when he said, "You've changed." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe I'm just becoming who I was meant to be." I joined a gardening club. I started volunteering at the local shelter again. I took a pottery class. I filled my days with things that had nothing to do with being someone's mother or caregiver. It felt strange at first, living just for me. But over time, it began to feel like breathing. A few months later, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address, but I recognized the handwriting. Inside were legal documents showing Damon had been removed from the board of directors at a firm he was trying to infiltrate. Harold never mentioned it, but I knew his hand was in it. I said nothing, just made us both a cup of coffee and left it quietly on the table. He smiled when he saw it. "Thank you," I said. He nodded. "You're welcome." Now, every morning, I walk barefoot through the garden. The herbs are thriving. The air is quiet. Some days I still think about Pepper, and I miss his voice. But I've placed a little stone with his name near the rosemary bush. He's part of my peace now. People sometimes say it's too late to start over at a certain age. I disagree. Starting over doesn't always mean moving or changing your name. Sometimes, it just means removing the people who were holding you back from being yourself. My name is Martha Ellis. I was a mother to a child who never loved me. I was nearly a victim of a plan made by the very person I gave everything to. But I am also a woman who took her life back, one small step at a time. And now I finally live for me.